hell. It wasn't like I willingly came in here on a white horse singing show tunes. I came in here on fire, and I didn't want to be an actor anymore, and my life was a mess, complete mess, and I had hurt a lot of people, and I felt deep shame and deep guilt. I didn't like to go outside much. I had a yearning not be here anymore. I was on my way out.
Is that where you were when you accepted the role of Padre Pio?
This is why when you spoke about the role, I wanted to kind of dive in there because it's kind of formative to how this all happened to me. I was willing because pain made me willing to go about this in a different way than I had previously. My opinion about God before this happened, before the pain struck, before my world had crumbled, was art, love, and God, they all mean the same thing. They're synonymous. And as an artist who creates art, I found myself in a godly position often, right? Where I was in charge. And I had also been told my whole life, like, your life is your life. You have to make with it what you can, You got to be a good guy, and then you got to get married, and then you got to get a house, and you got to get a job and do good at your job, and like your life is your life, and things will work out if you put effort in, and it's up to you. And I always really felt that, and it made it hard to believe in God because it felt like my managerial skills are what are going to amount to a fulfilled existence.
Yeah.
When all of my designs failed, when all of my plans went out the window, when my life had led to serious infliction of pain and damage on other people, I threw up my hands like, my plans are garbage and I don't want to be here anymore, and that was required to enter Pio. You had to actually, it's why it feels like celestial mathematics or some kind of divine, it feels way too coincidental to be a coincidence. But my life was completely, like I told you, on fire, and I'm in a spiritual program where I go on Zoom, and we have meetings, and another person that was in this meeting, who's also part of this same fellowship of like the down and outs, was a man named Abel Ferreira. And he wound up seeing me in the meeting. We shared sensibilities. We had heard each other share a few times, and then he wrote me in the chat box, "Do you know about Padre Pio?" And of course, I didn't know anything about Padre Pio.
This is before the offer of the film.
This had been gestating on his side for years because his grandfather comes from the same region in Pietrelcina, and he has a connection to Pio in many different ways. He's not a Catholic; he's a Buddhist, which I always had trouble with as a person who was always self. And now, I'm not going to get into that conversation, but me and him have wrestled over this many times. And I thought, okay, well, what is this Padre Pio thing? And this is early days in my what now looks like a salvific journey from my side.
Yeah.
I was still egotistical on max. I was still grasping at straws. How do I hold on to what I've lost? How do I build a career again? And so when this director who I respected, I had known he made movies that I really loved. Bad Lieutenant for me is one of the greatest performances ever made, and I know he's an actor's director, and the fact that there was this director reaching out to me, because at this point I'm nuclear. Nobody wants to talk to me, including my mother. The manager's not calling, the agent's not calling. I'm not connected to the business anymore. And so the fact that this man reached out to me felt like something like, in my egoic mind, wow, this is a miracle.
This is my chance.
This is my chance. Yeah. And so my ego shows up. And now I'm like, yeah, well, Padre Pio. And my ego is what makes me research Pio. It's not my Catholicism or my yearnings towards God.
So you thought this would be a cool role for me to play.
Great, now I can get back on the horse.
Yeah, okay.
And so I start researching Pio. And as I'm researching Pio, he tells me about his plans to make a movie, and he tells me that Willem Dafoe is going to be in the movie. And now I'm really in ego. Wait, so I can go from bottom barrel to working with Willem Dafoe? This is my chance, back on the hustle, back on the ego.
Yeah.
And I start leaning into this thing, and he says, well, if you want to do this role, I need you to start researching. Go up and find I need you to go find a seminary, a Catholic
that's
seminary.
When you made your way up to San Lorenzo.
So the closest seminary to me, living in Pasadena, was San Lorenzo. So I drive up there, and I park my truck, and I start living in the parking lot. And I'm immersing myself in this world, and I'm sending videos back to Willem and Abel, who at the time were, working on the script, and I'm falling into a group of men that met me in San Lorenzo, namely a guy named Brother Jude, who starts talking to me about the gospel. And he says, well, if you're going to play Pio, you need to read the gospel. And so I'd never read the gospel. and he's reading Matthew to me.
So you'd never read like the Gospel of Matthew straight through? Yeah, okay.
I've read all Sam Harris. I've watched all the TED Talks.
Yeah, right.
And was really good at attacking Catholicism because it made me feel superior. It
so
made
you
me
were
feel
kind of agnostic/atheist at the time.
Yes, I'd like to argue because it made me feel like I was in power.
Right. Yeah.
I'd like to be contrarian.
Yeah.
I like to sit with a bishop and then put you on your heels because that would make me feel powerful.
Right.
Which I find most secular people enjoy, the control of it.
Yeah.
Because so much of life is uncontrollable, to feel in control feels good. So I was that guy. I come up with these arguments. My mother had a spirituality that was sort of undefined.
She was Jewish, right? Your mother?
Yeah, but like hippie Jewish, like not like traditional Jewish according to the Testament. My mother had never read the Old Testament. Okay. She was Jewish in culture. She liked the art. She liked being a part of it. She liked the rabbis and the charisma, but she wasn't a practicing Jew in that she wore tefillin and read the Old Testament. And I had never been given any of this information. I've been bar mitzvahed phonetically. I read the Hebrew phonetically. Okay. So it felt like a show. Yeah. It felt like a hustle.
You didn't know what you were saying.
I didn't know what I was saying. Okay. And in that way, it felt, and it wasn't emotional. It felt like I was doing it for my grandmother, who at that time was on her last leg, and I was told I needed to get bar mitzvah for my grandmother.
And you were like 13 at the time? At the
13,
age, yeah.
and I read it phonetically, and my grandmother's happy, and they put me on a chair, and that's my spirituality for a long time. And it felt fake, because I never invested, I had never felt any real suffering in my life, so I didn't have any willingness to have any belief, so I had no faith. Okay, so that's the...
So now you're up at San Lorenzo, and you're given the Gospel of Matthew.
I'm reading
Matthew. It for the first time.
I read it for the first time, and things start to strike me, like John the Baptist.
Yeah, okay.
Like the story of John the Baptist, being a reformed hedonist, being this man who was wearing like this, who was sort of like, scraggly and like kind of felt like an old Western character from some kind of like I don't know, like he felt like a cowboy.
Eating locust and wearing
he felt like kind of rustic and strong and masculine. And my opinion of Christ at this point felt almost like I was reading about a Buddhist, like this very soft, fragile, all loving, all listening, but no ferocity, no romance.
Then you hadn't read the Gospel.
I hadn't read the Gospel
at that point.
I just had this art that I had seen of like this very soft,
more feminized.
Jesus. Yes. And so I hadn't had this idea of like the Old Testament, Christ on a horse, cape dipped in blood, sword. I had none of that was in my lexicon of knowledge. So all I knew about was this very soft, meek Jesus, which didn't fit into my idea of what masculinity would be. I come from my dad was a Mongol biker, it's like it wasn't appealing to me. And then I read about John the Baptist, and it became quite appealing. The grizzle.
Yeah, right.
And then you get further into the gospel, and you start getting into like elements of this like redemptive. It felt like I started reading about a route. I started like reading a map, towards something that felt like let go. That's really what I got out of the Gospels. If I could wrap it up in 2 words, it was let go. And at that time when I was reading it, I was holding on so tight to a life that I was slipping away through my hands, to 35 years of management, that the Gospel gave me this invite to just let go. What never was appealing to me about Buddhism was this idea, like, if I'm in a boat and the boat is sinking and I don't know how to swim, Buddhism is a book that tells you, and read this and learn how to swim better. And at the time in my life, like, I didn't want to swim anymore. I had a gun on the table. I was out of here. I didn't want to be alive anymore when all of this happened, okay? Shame like I had never experienced before. Kind of shame, you forget how to breathe. You don't know where to go. You can't go outside to get like a taco. Like you don't want to go anywhere.
And that's where you are when you're up there reading the Gospel and thinking about playing Padre Pio. You're in that state.
Yes, but I'm also in this deep desire to like hold on.
Yeah.
And so I read the Gospel with this man, Jude, and I keep hearing like in many different variations of it. I'm not going to explain the whole Gospel here, nor do I need to. It's you. But I keep hearing let go. Mm-hmm. And to a person who's been gripping so tight for so long, it feels like, it just feels like, it just feels like the right move to let go, like complete surrender for real. And it stops being this like prep of a movie, and it starts being something that feels beyond all that, and I stop sending videos. Like at a certain point with Jude, I just like really fall in. And then I meet these women, Sister Lucia of the Sacred Heart Sisters, who starts really like catechizing me in a very real way, in a very like, let's go through it, let's talk about it paragraph by paragraph. And what happened was there also happened to be like a meeting at the church for this other spiritual program that I'm in, right next door to Sister Lucia's. So I'd wake up in the morning, 9 a.m., I'd go to my meeting, and then 10 a.m. I'd be with Sister Lucia, and then 11 a.m. I'd be with Brother Jude, and then 12 I'd be with Father James, who's now in Burnley. But Father James was like this. Father James felt like an old sheriff. Right. I don't know if you met Father James.
Sure, yeah.
He's like this. He's like a grandfather.
Right.
His hand is enormous.
Yeah.
He made me feel safe. He would just put his hand on my shoulder sometimes, and he wouldn't say much to me. He wasn't, but he was also like this Archie Bunker character, where like his love felt like you had to, like you were pulling it out of him.
Yeah.
But he's always around, and I started falling into this group, and I'm living there, so I'm taking showers in there, and I'm eating with them, and we're hanging out. And
they're drawing you into the Christian, the Catholic thing. They're kind of drawing you into the gospel, into a certain way of life.
But more than that, it's not even like they're drawing me into like laughter. They're like sharing jokes with me. It's like we're just like hanging out. And at this time, I had no friends in my life.
What did Jesus do with people when he first met them, typically? He'd eat and drink with them. So you think of Jesus, well, he's giving the Sermon on the Mount. Well, yes, he does. But the typical move of Jesus was, well, let's get around the table and we'll talk.
Yeah.
And he's talking to prostitutes and sinners and tax collectors, and so that move of theirs, to kind of draw you in.
Yeah.
Draw you into their life.
Yeah, and I'm eating their ice cream, and I'm eating them out of house and home, and I'm filling the tacos back up, but like I'm really like, they're not asking nothing of me. They're not asking me to sign nothing. They're not asking me to do nothing or take pictures. I'm just like sitting around, and I'm petting their cats, and I'm hanging out,
Yeah, right. But the lesson of, as you put it, let go, was coming through.
Yeah, that's all I kept hearing.
But not just let go, but reach out, right, to someone who's reaching out to you.
The reach out had happened for me.
Yeah.
I was already there. I had nowhere to go. This was the last stop on the train. There was nowhere else to go. In every sense, it was like, I know now, like my God was using my ego to draw me to him, was drawing me away from worldly desires. It was all happening simultaneously, but there would have been no impetus for me to get in the car and drive up here if I didn't think, oh, I'm gonna save my career. And what happened to me when I got here is a switch happened. It was like 3-card Monty. It was like somebody tricked me into it.
Yeah.
It felt like. Not in a bad way, in a way that like I couldn't see it. I was so close to it, I couldn't see it. I see it differently now because time has passed. And anyway, so I'm hanging with Brother Jude, and then Brother Jude gets called away, and he has to go like be an archivist somewhere. So he's got no time for me. And another man enters the fray named Brother Alex, and Brother Alex has a totally different energy.
Young guy, he's about your age.
He's my age.
Yeah.
Super austere.
Yeah.
Very prayerful.
Yeah.
And I don't know nothing about prayer because I can't cultivate an unforgiving. I don't know anything about silence. I don't know anything about quiet. I don't know anything about it. I got a cell phone in my phone that will give me everything my ego needs. It's buzzing all the time. I got all this, there is no silence, or I don't know anything about meditation. Meditation at this point in my life feels like a self-imposed timeout. Prayer feels like I'm memorizing somebody else's words, like I'm an actor, like I'm doing monologues for myself in my head. And Alex says, just go into that chapel and just shut up.
Where the Blessed Sacrament is.
Yes,
yeah.
And just sit there. Just sit there and be quiet. And that feels like a very strange thing to tell me, and I'm also rebelling. And right around this time, you and the deacons show up for like this deacons meeting.
Well, that's the first time I met you.
It's the first time I meet you.
Okay.
The deacons are all hanging out at the church.
Right.
And I feel like, oh, this is like, wow, it's amazing. I get to sit in here, and I feel like I'm not allowed to be there, but then all the deacons are like being really warm with me, and I'm sitting in the back.
It was Mass first, right?
It's Mass.
Then,
We do Mass, and then we go like have a little sandwich.
Right.
And you do this talk about prayer.
Yeah.
And how it's really a simple 4-step process, prayer, and I needed somebody to simplify it for me, because it felt like, one, I needed it to be defined. I didn't want it to be this esoteric I needed something very defined and very practical. I needed something very like boots on the ground. And you said, quiet leads to loving thoughts leads to loving action leads to peace. And that hit me heavy.
It was
And
Mother
then,
Teresa I was quoting there. That's her.
whoever it was, it's
Yeah.
changed my life. So then you go into pray rosary.
Yeah.
And I'm just learning rosary at this time. I know the front half. I don't know all the prayers. I can do, I can get to the middle of the rosary. I don't know the dismount prayers, but I have enough to like, it pauses my head,
Yeah.
which I guess what rosary does for a lot of people. It makes it tactile.
It's a great prayer, right?
It takes me out of the cognitive and it puts me
Yeah.
into the physical.
Yeah.
It physicalizes it. And for somehow that pauses all of my internal nonstop chitter-chatter monologuing of what I want, what I need, and this animal in
It
me.
calms the monkey mind. That was Merton's line that he got from the Buddhists, actually. The monkey mind's always leaping around.
Yes.
Here, and it calms that. It calms that and centers it.
Yeah, and makes me feel present because
Yeah.
it's right here.
Right.
I can hold
you
it.
hold it in your hand.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we're praying the rosary, and I'm waiting for loving thoughts, and it's not my first or second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh thought. But then I hear a thought like, call your mother, tell her you love her. Now, me and my mother at this time, my mother don't want nothing to do with me. You know, the news that had come out has been like I've been abusive to women, and I've been shooting dogs, and I've been willingly giving women STDs, and like it's disgusting. It's depraved. And my mother is embarrassed beyond all imagination. She doesn't want nothing to do with me. And we hadn't talked, and I'm living in this parking lot. And I get out of rosary with you, and I call my mother, and I say, I don't have much to say to you, but I love you and I'm safe. And she said, oh, I'm so grateful. And she hangs up the phone, and it's the first time I had really like talked to my mother, and I felt this peace. Because I had all this resentment and animosity, like, how could you dip on me? You're my mother. You know, no matter what happens, like, this is conditional love that you offer me. So, then I start reading the Confessions by Augustine and his mother and that relationship. And
right.
everything starts to feel like click, 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 click.
Right.
And Augustine being like a hedonist who had made all these flaws. And then they started explaining Francis to me and all this ego that was in Francis. Just a complete egomaniac.
Same story, right.
Yeah, like, and I start feeling all these connections, and I start seeing this route. And and it says let go, and I find a way for myself. This is all before we're even in the movie. I'm not even reading the script yet. I'm just like laying the ground, I'm not even into Pio yet. I'm passing Pio's statue every day, and I'm kissing him on the hand just out of like reverence for the statue. Yeah. But I don't know anything about the man yet. Then I get to reading about Pio and about suffering. Now, this is another hack that happens to me at some point where I felt like my suffering was pointless. I didn't understand what was going on. I felt like, and Father James walks me through like offering your suffering up as a purposeful. As like intrinsically valuable, that God taps certain people to go through certain suffering so that they can be more effective at bringing the good news forward. And we start talking about purpose. And I'm questioning like what my purpose is, because before this moment, my purpose was just to be a good actor. My purpose was just to be the best actor. That was my whole purpose in life, like just such a little dream, like the dream of an ant. Yeah. And James says, what are you good at? And I'm like, I'm good at bleeding in front of people.